Egypt left us a story we can read. Mesopotamia left us 3,000 years of receipts, laws, poetry and complaints in a script we cracked in the 1800s and have been reading ever since. This one left us thousands of pieces of writing and we cannot read a single word. Not a name, not a number we can be certain of, not a god, not a king, not a city. We have the writing. We have it in enormous quantities, pressed into stone and clay and copper from over 1,000 sites. Scholars have been working on it for more than a century. Serious prize money has been offered. Some of the best computational linguists alive have thrown machine learning at it. Nothing. It is still silent. And that matters more than it might sound, because this was not a small or marginal civilization. At its height, it covered roughly 1.25 million square kilometers. That is larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia put together. It was, by area, the biggest civilization on Earth at the time, and for most of modern history, nobody knew it had ever existed at all. This is the story of the Indus Valley, the civilization that built the most advanced cities of the Bronze Age, apparently without kings, apparently without armies, and then walked away from them. And the reason this video is different from the last two is simple. For Egypt and Mesopotamia, I could tell you what they thought, because they wrote it down and we can read it. Here, I can only tell you what they built and what they left behind and what we have guessed from it. Let's start with how it was found, because that is a story in itself. In the 1850s, British engineers were laying railway track across the Punjab, in what is now Pakistan. Ballast, the crushed stone bed that rails sit on, is heavy and expensive to transport, so the crews did what construction crews have always done, and looked for something local. They found it. Near a village called Harappa, there were enormous mounds of ancient fired brick, apparently abandoned, apparently useless, in beautiful condition. Hard, uniform, and free. So they dug them up and laid 160 kilometers of railway on them. Nobody realized for another 70 years that they had just paved a railway line with the bones of a lost civilization. The bricks were about 4,500 years old. It was not until the 1920s that proper excavation began. Two archaeologists working two separate sites, Daya Ramsani at Harappa and Rakal Das Banerjee at Mohenjo Daro, roughly 600 kilometers apart, started uncovering something neither of them could immediately explain. And when their reports reached the Director General of Archaeology in India, John Marshall, he noticed something extraordinary. The two sites, hundreds of kilometers apart, were using the same bricks. The same proportions, the same weights, the same script. This was not two towns. This was one civilization, and it was enormous, and it was older than anyone had assumed anything in the region could be. In 1924, Marshall announced it to the world, and the entire timeline of South Asian history had to be rewritten in a single stroke. Since then, over 1,000 settlements have been identified, spread across what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, along the Indus River and a second river system to the east that has largely dried up. 5 or 6 of those settlements were genuinely large cities. Mohenjo Daro, the biggest, probably held somewhere around 30 to 40,000 people. Now here is where it gets strange. Walk into a Mesopotamian city, and the first thing you notice is that it grew. Streets wander, buildings lean into each other. The city is a record of every decision anyone ever made about where to put a wall. Walk into Mohenjo Daro, and you notice the opposite. It was planned. The main streets run north to south and east to west, meeting at right angles, dividing the city into large rectangular blocks. Some of those streets are 10 meters wide. Within the blocks, narrower lanes give access to individual houses. The orientation is consistent. The layout is deliberate. Somebody sat down before the city existed and decided how it was going to work. And this is not one clever city. The same grid logic shows up at Harappa. It shows up at Dolavira, at Kalibangan, at Lothal. Across a territory the size of Western Europe, they were building cities to a shared plan. Then there are the bricks. Indus bricks were fired, not just sun-dried, which makes them vastly more durable, which is precisely why railway engineers found them still usable 4,000 years later. But the remarkable thing is the proportions. Indus bricks were made in a ratio of 1 to 2 to 4, thickness to width to length. That ratio is not decorative. It is the ratio that lets you bond brickwork properly in every direction without cutting, and it is the same ratio still used in bricklaying today, and they used it everywhere. The same ratio at sites hundreds of kilometers apart for centuries. Think about what that requires. Not just a good idea, but a standard, communicated, agreed upon, maintained and enforced across an enormous area for generations, without, as far as we can tell, an empire to enforce it. The same is true of their weights. Indus weights are small, polished cubes of chert, and they follow a strict system, doubling in the lower range, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, then shifting to decimal-style multiples higher up. Weights found at opposite ends of the civilization match each other to within a fraction of a gram. Somebody, somehow, was keeping an entire subcontinent honest about what a kilogram was. And then there is the water. This is the part that genuinely startles people who study early cities. Mohenjo Daro had covered drains running beneath its streets, built of brick with inspection points for cleaning. Individual houses connected to them. Many houses had their own bathing platform, sloped so water would run off into the street drain rather than pooling. Many had a private well. We are talking about household plumbing and municipal sanitation around 4,500 years ago. Some cities in Europe would not manage the same thing until the 1800s. At the center of Mohenjo-Daro sits the structure everyone photographs, a large, sunken brick basin, roughly 12 meters by 7, about 2.5 meters deep, with steps down at either end. It was made watertight with a layer of bitumen, which is an engineering decision so practical it feels modern. There was a drain to empty it. There were rooms around it. We call it the Great Bath, and that name is a confession because we do not actually know what it was for. Ritual bathing is the usual guess, and it is a reasonable one, given how important ritual purity became in later South Asian tradition. But that is a guess reaching backwards from a culture 2,000 years later. Nobody wrote down what happened in that pool, or if they did, we cannot read it. Which brings us to the thing that is missing. In Egypt, you cannot avoid the pharaoh. He is on every wall, in every temple, buried under a mountain of stone, named and renamed for eternity. In Mesopotamia, kings carved their victories into palace walls in gruesome detail and put their names on every brick. In the Indus Valley, we have found nothing that clearly says king. No royal tombs stuffed with gold, no palace complex obviously distinct from everything around it, no monumental statue of a ruler, no relief carvings of a leader receiving tribute or crushing an enemy, no inscription we can point to and say, this is his name, this is what he claimed to have done. The grandest object of the whole civilization is a soapstone figure about 17 centimeters tall, a bearded man in a patterned robe with a band around his head, eyes half closed. He is known worldwide as the Priest King. He is almost certainly not a priest. He is almost certainly not a king. That name was attached by early excavators, comparing him to Mesopotamian figures they already understood, and it stuck, and now the most famous face of the civilization carries a job title we made up for him. Weapons are similarly thin on the ground. There are spearheads and arrowheads, but they are unimpressive, often too soft to be much use in serious combat, and there is nothing resembling the arsenals or the fortress architecture you find in contemporary Mesopotamia. There are walls at Indus sites, substantial ones, but many appear to be flood defenses or boundary markers as much as military works. We have not found mass graves of the slain. We have not found burned cities from that period. We have not found a triumphal relief of anyone conquering anyone. Housing, meanwhile, is relatively uniform. There are bigger houses and smaller ones, and there was clearly inequality. That is not in doubt. But the gap you see between a pharaoh's tomb and a farmer's grave is simply not there in the same way. Most people seem to have had access to clean water and drainage. That is a very unusual thing to be able to say about a Bronze Age city. So a picture has emerged, popular in books and documentaries, of a peaceful, egalitarian, almost utopian civilization of engineers and merchants with no kings and no wars. I want to be honest with you about that picture because it is more fragile than it sounds. Everything I have just described is an absence. We have not found royal tombs. We have not found palaces. We have not found war reliefs. But absence of evidence is a slippery thing to build a society out of. It is entirely possible that Indus rulers simply expressed power differently, through ritual, through control of trade, through cloth and perishable goods that did not survive. It is possible their elite buildings look ordinary to us because we do not know what we are looking at. And crucially, if the writing said king on every seal, we would have no idea. The honest version is this. The Indus Valley shows a strikingly different pattern of power from its contemporaries, and we cannot fully explain it. That is genuinely interesting. It is more interesting than pretending we have solved it. What we can say with confidence is that they traded, and they traded far. Indus goods turn up in Mesopotamia. Distinctive long carnelian beads, drilled end to end, with a technique so difficult that specialists still study how they managed it. Some of those beads are over 10 centimeters long, drilled from both ends with a stone drill bit hard enough to cut carnelian, meeting in the middle without splitting the stone. Modern craftspeople have tried to reproduce it. It takes days per bead, etched beads with white patterns burned into the surface, Indus-style seals found in Mesopotamian cities, and the Mesopotamians wrote about them, which is the closest we will get to hearing an outside voice describe these people. Their texts mention a distant land called Meluhha, reached by sea, sending carnelian, ivory, exotic woods, and copper. Most scholars think Meluhha is the Indus. There is even a reference to a Meluhhan interpreter living in Mesopotamia, which means the two civilizations were in enough contact to need professional translators. Sit with that for a second. 4,000 years ago, somebody's actual job was translating this language, and we would give almost anything to have 5 minutes with him, because it all comes back to the script. We have somewhere around 4,000 inscribed objects. Most are seals, small, square, beautifully carved pieces of steatite, usually showing an animal, a bull, an elephant, a rhinoceros, a tiger, or a creature that appears to be a unicorn in profile, with a short line of signs above it. They were used to stamp clay, probably to mark ownership or authorize goods, exactly as seals were used in Mesopotamia. The script has somewhere between 400 and 600 distinct signs, depending on who is counting. That number is itself a clue, and an awkward one. A pure alphabet has a few dozen signs. A syllabary might have 100 or so. A system with thousands of signs, like early Chinese or Egyptian, is usually logographic, where signs stand for whole words. 400 to 600 sits in an odd middle zone, suggesting a mixed system with both word signs and sound signs, which is exactly what Mesopotamian cuneiform was. So far, so promising. Here is the problem. The average inscription is about 5 signs long. 5. The longest text on a single surface anyone has found runs to 17 signs. There is one tantalizing exception. At Dolavira, excavators found what looks like a signboard, 10 large signs made of inlaid white mineral, each around 37 centimeters tall, apparently mounted above a gateway. It is the largest Indus writing ever found. It is 10 signs long, and we have no idea what it says. Beyond that, there is no long inscription anywhere. No monument covered in text, no archive of tablets, no literature, no law code, no annals. Decipherment normally needs one of two things: either a bilingual text, the same message written in a known script alongside the unknown one, which is how Egyptian hieroglyphs fell to the Rosetta Stone, or enough volume of text that patterns become undeniable. The Indus script offers neither. No bilingual has ever been found, and the total surviving corpus, all 4,000 objects together, amounts to less text than a short pamphlet. There is a third problem, and it is the worst one. We do not know what language it recorded. With Egyptian, scholars had Coptic, a descendant language still used in church liturgy, which gave them sounds to work with. With the Indus, we are guessing, the leading candidate argued for decades by the Finnish scholar Asko Parpola is that it recorded an early Dravidian language related to Tamil and other languages spoken mainly in southern India today. Others have argued for an Indo-Aryan language, or for something else entirely, a language with no surviving descendants at all. If that last option is true, then even a perfect decipherment of the signs would give us sounds we could pronounce and not a single word we could understand. And then, in 2004, 3 scholars published a paper that made the whole field distinctly uncomfortable. Their argument, roughly, was this: maybe it is not writing. They pointed to the extreme brevity of the inscriptions, the absence of any long text, and statistical features they said did not look like language. Their suggestion was that the signs might be non-linguistic symbols, closer to heraldry or religious emblems or ownership marks, meaningful without encoding speech. The response was fierce. Other researchers ran statistical analyses of their own, looking at how predictable each sign is given the one before it, and reported that the Indus signs behaved much more like a written language than like decorative symbol systems. That argument is still live. There is no consensus, which means that after 100 years of work, we cannot even agree on whether the thing we are failing to read is a text. So what happened to them? Around 1900 BCE, the cities begin to unwind, not in a night, not in a war. Over roughly 2 centuries, the great urban centers lose population. The drainage systems stop being maintained, house walls are rebuilt more crudely, the standardized weights fall out of use, and the writing simply stops appearing. For a long time, there was a dramatic explanation, and you may have heard it: invasion. The theory, associated most strongly with the archaeologist Mortimer Wheeler in the 1940s, held that Indo-Aryan speakers swept in from the northwest and destroyed the cities. Wheeler pointed to some scattered unburied skeletons at Mohenjo Daro and to references in early Sanskrit texts to a god destroying fortified places, and famously wrote that Indra, the storm god, stood accused. That theory has not aged well. The skeletons were not from a single event, showed no consistent battle injuries, and came from different periods. There is no destruction layer. There are no burned cities, no mass graves, no sudden appearance of foreign weapons. The city decline also began before the migrations in question. Almost no archaeologist working today defends the invasion model as the cause of the collapse. What the evidence points to instead is water and climate. The Indus civilization depended on 2 river systems. One was the Indus itself. The other ran to the east, along a course now traced by a seasonal riverbed called the Ghaggar Hakra. A very large number of Indus sites were built along that eastern system, more than along the Indus in some surveys, and over time it appears to have weakened and largely dried, as the rivers feeding it shifted course or were captured by other drainages. At the same time, the wider climate turned. Around 4,200 years ago, the monsoon weakened significantly across the region, part of the same broad climate shift that broke the Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia and helped end Egypt's Old Kingdom. We covered that event in both previous videos. It is genuinely striking. 3 of the largest civilizations on Earth, on 3 separate river systems, all fell into serious trouble within a few centuries of each other. And every one of them was undone by the same fundamental vulnerability: a highly organized society built on water, arriving reliably, meeting a period when it did not. But here is what makes the Indus ending different, and to my mind, sadder. Egypt collapsed and was rebuilt. Mesopotamia was sacked and conquered and rebuilt, over and over. The Indus cities were not destroyed. they were left. The population did not vanish. Settlement patterns show people moving east and south toward the Ganges plain, into smaller villages and towns, taking their crops and their crafts with them. Rural life continued. Genetic studies of the region indicate substantial continuity, meaning the descendants of these people are living in South Asia today in very large numbers. What ended was the urban system, the grid cities, the standardized weights, the seals, the shared script, the long-distance trade. Whatever had held that network together across 1 million square kilometers stopped holding, and once it stopped, nobody put it back. The writing is the part that gets me. For roughly 700 years, people across an enormous territory used a common script. They pressed it into seals, scratched it onto pottery, inscribed it on copper tablets. Then, within a few generations, they stopped, and the knowledge of how to read it disappeared so completely that when it resurfaced 4,000 years later, there was no thread left to pull, no descendant script, no tradition of scholars who still half remembered it, no temple copyists carrying on out of habit the way Babylonian priests kept writing cuneiform for centuries after their world had gone. Mesopotamia went silent for 1,800 years, and then we got it back. The Indus went silent, and it has stayed silent. So did they fail? They built the best planned cities of their age. They gave ordinary households running water and covered drains at a time when the rest of the world was throwing waste into the street. They kept a system of weights and measures consistent across a territory larger than Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, apparently without an emperor to enforce it. They traded by sea with civilizations 2,000 kilometers away. They did all of it for roughly 700 years, and they appear to have done it with far less violence than anyone around them. And we do not know what any of them were called, not one name, not the cities, not the rulers, not the gods, not a single person. Mohenjo Daro is a modern name. It means mound of the dead. Harappa is the name of the village that sat on top of it. Everything we know about them, we know from what they built and what they left. The words are all still there in their thousands, sitting in museum cases, perfectly preserved, completely legible as marks on stone, and utterly closed to us. There may be no way to open them. Without a bilingual text, without a longer inscription, without knowing the language underneath, it is entirely possible this civilization stays anonymous permanently. Some scholars think a decipherment is impossible in principle with what we have, but the seals keep coming out of the ground, and somewhere under the Punjab, under a field or a modern town or a riverbed that moved, there may be a longer text, a single tablet with 2 scripts on it. One good bilingual would crack the whole thing open in an afternoon, and 4,500 years of silence would end. That is the strange hope of the Indus Valley. Egypt and Mesopotamia gave us their stories, and we have read them, and we know how those stories end. This one hasn't started yet. 3 rivers so far. The Nile, which was generous. The Tigris and Euphrates, which were not. The Indus, which moved. There is a 4th. It runs through northern China. It carries so much sediment that it is named for the color of its water, and it has changed course so violently and so often, drowning so many people in the process, that its own nickname translates roughly as China's sorrow, and the civilization that grew on it did something none of the others managed. It is still here. That's next.